items in the pouch in front of you.
And have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. Whether for TV, film, or theme parks, Kirk Hanson has used a pencil and a little ingenuity to create some of the most beloved stories of our time. As a story artist for Disney feature animation, Kirk helped bring to life Aladdin, Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Hercules. He also found himself over at Imagineering, fleshing out ideas for Pirates of the Caribbean and Monsters Incorporated, Ride and Go Seek. Kirk was nice enough to chat with me about starting his career at Hanna Barbera, pitching scenes to Jeffery Katzenberg, and the Country Bear Jamboree racing dark ride that could have been. All of that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders. Kirk Hanson, welcome to Dreamfinders. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Nathan. Good to be with you.
So let's start with something that's actually not very Disney, sort of Disney adjacent maybe, and that's Hanna Barbera, which is where you kind of started off in the mid '80s, working on things like Smurfs and Flintstone Kids. I'm always interested in the atmosphere of other animation studios. I know quite a bit about Disney, the animation studio there and different things like that. But what's the atmosphere like at Hanna Barbera when you end up over there?
It was a lot of fun, and it was a great place to start. Although I think, if I remember correctly, I was actually doing Brave Little Toaster.
Yes, that's true.
Before HB, mm-hmm. and then finally got hired over at HB by the great Mike Takamoto, who's the son of Iwo, and Buana Takamoto. And I started in models and design, and I was doing character designs and props and things. But then I kind of gravitated more towards characters and then storyboards. Just 2-3 years later, there was a show that was in production called Fender Bender 500s. That started around 1986 or 87, and it was essentially another try at Wacky Races, which is one of my all-time favorite shows that ever came out of HB. And so I lied my way onto that production, worked for Kaz Ancelotti, who was I think he was a Ralph Bakshi guy from New York, but he'd come out to California, and he was producer on that show. So it was fun.
The thing about Hanna-Barbera, which I think is interesting, and this was a lot when it comes to TV animation in general, it's quick turnaround, comparatively speaking, to say a feature. What was that process like from a story artist perspective? Because if you're doing storyboards, that's pretty quick turnaround already. Right. And then it's quick turnaround in the sense that you're doing, television animation. So was it kind of a chaotic process, or was it sort of a fine-tuned machine?
No, it was. They got it down to a science. It was Disney was the real eye opener once I got over there. But doing storyboards for television is a process where you get a handout, from the producer, and you get like the script, and you get the models. And now think of this: no online anything back then. So you'd get a stack of stuff about, I'm making this with my hands, probably 3 inches or 4 inches worth of paper, which included the main model pack and the specific models for the show, background designs, whatever they've done, and then you work from the script. The hired risk is what we say, and the idea is to hit the rough deadline, get the notes, and then you come back and you do a final pass. But in features, you are the Lone Ranger in television. You almost never see anybody else in terms of doing boards and things. And a lot of the boards are done freelance, so you're working at home. But feature boarding is a real team effort, and you're on a storyboard staff we just say story at features, and you work with the directors. You get your hand out, and sometimes it's pages, or script pages. Sometimes it's a notion. Sometimes it's a paragraph, which happens in television as well, especially these board-driven shows. But the thing about working in features is you will do the assignment. You'll do what they're asking you to do. And back then we used to pin them up, and a story, the pinned up storyboard invented at Disney, and you pitch in front of the crew. Everybody would stop, the story crew anyway, and the directors would be there, and the producer and the story crew, and then you'd pitch the thing, and then you get notes from everybody, which is what makes it unique and different from working in television. So, and I missed that a lot. I did that for about 12 years, and I kind of missed that camaraderie of working with the entire crew. But the thing in television, you would hit the deadline as closely as you can, Going a day or two over didn't like doing that right off the bat, so I try to avoid that. There are some people who are just famously late, but they're so good that they get away with it. So,
what is that process overall like? So, when you're talking about doing storyboards and stuff, clearly for those who don't have a full grasp on this, give them a little grasp on what the job entails, and then I'm also curious about how long it takes for you to do. I don't know. Do you get assigned a full script or a scene, or does it depend on the thing?
It depends. If it's sometimes the shows were 2 11-minute episodes per half hour, so you might get an entire 11-minute, which is a lot, or you might split it with somebody. And then the process for me is to thumbnail the thing. I usually would thumbnail, and I learned this from Mikey Takamoto. I would thumbnail on the actual script pages because the words are right there. And you can't. It's better to keep track of what's going on and what you need to do. And I would do those in red pencil, and then I would start on. You would get printed Xerox format pages, usually 3 panels across, with spaces for action and dialogue and slugging, which is timing, and it was all done analog. It was all done traditionally, and you're just working on a stack of paper. You're working on these, and the thing was the thing about going from thumbnails to your first blue sketch. We'd work in blue pencil and then tie it down in either ink or which is not the way I went. Black pen, a nice sharp black pencil. The thing is, the frustrating thing was if your little thumbnail was really vibrant and vital and full of life and had great kind of design in it and everything, reproducing it in a larger panel, that was sometimes frustrating, because sometimes I forever was like, I wish I could get the vitality of that thumbnail into my blue rough on the page, but So I started doing that. I was doing that pretty much. I wasn't doing models anymore. I was just doing that exclusively. So you might have 2 weeks to rough if you maybe have 6 pages of script. They might give you the courtesy of maybe 2 weeks to rough and then 2 weeks to clean up. So a month.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Wacky Racers being a favorite of yours. I am curious about what other animation influenced you from a young age, and what sort of influenced your style. Well,
it was Hanna Barbera, bar none. That was the first stuff I fell in love with because there was more of it on television. Disney was great when the Wonderful World of Color would have animation, but there wasn't a lot. You got an hour on Sunday nights. When the Mickey Mouse Club was on in syndication, you would get cartoons there too. So those were fun to look at. But I have to say it. I liked HB more, maybe just because it occupied more of my life. I don't know, but
I mean, there was a time when Hanna Barbera owned like something along the lines of like 75% of the animation for children on television. I mean, it was a massive number.
But of course, they started out not doing really animation for children. They did primetime shows.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So the Flintstones, which is on right now on MeTV, those were all primetime shows. The Flintstones, and then Top Cat, and then the Jetsons, and they're excellent. They're all excellent. And then Johnny Quest came along, and I was, that was it, because I was I was a 6-year-old, 7-year-old boy, watching this adventure show that was not like anything else. People say things like, "Oh, it was just kind of a knockoff of Clutch Cargo," and it's like, "Hey, folks, have you seen Clutch Cargo or Space Angel?" Even though on Space Angel, Alex Toth worked on that, and so it's got really, really great drawings. But that nothing came together the way Bill and Joe's stuff. From writing to design to voice casting to the music to the background design. I mean, these are the guys who are winning Oscars every year during the 40s with Tom and Jerry, and they were beating Walt out for Best Short. They won 7 in a row. I think it was 7 in a row, or it might have been 7 out of 8 with Tom and Jerry. So these guys knew how to make films. And they had to reinvent it for television. There had been a couple of forays into it. Jay Ward was one of the earlier guys with Crusader Rabbit, which was really Rocky and Bullwinkle. It was Crusader and Rags the Tiger, who was the Bullwinkle character, and Crusader Rabbit was a sharp little guy who would lead him on the adventure. But and then Rocky and Bullwinkle came about 1959, I think. But Bill and Joe got going 57 because the MGM Cartoon Studio was closed and everybody got fired. So Bill and Joe really provided a haven for everybody who was working in the theatrical shorts divisions, not just MGM, but Warner Brothers. A lot of great Warner's artists ended up over at HB, including Michael Maltese, who was a great story guy. He was Chuck Jones' story guy, and just did really great stuff at HB too. So,
where did you grow up? And were you always an illustrator by nature, or was that something you came to a little later?
Well, I was a cartoon watcher, so I drew like crazy after everything was, after the show was over. I would draw. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, and was there till I went to college. Did a couple of summers at Disneyland, and I knew that we knew after the second summer we weren't going to make enough money to get into college. After I was accepted, I went to California Institute of the Arts in Valencia, which was, of course, Walt's project, where he took. It's pronounced. It's funny. Everybody thinks it's Chenard, and everybody says Chenard, but the way Mrs. Chenard pronounced it was Chouinard, because it's French. So Mrs. Chouinard ran this school, this art school, very famous school, and Walt started sending his artists there in the 30s prior to the startup of Snow White, because he wanted them to draw better. So he said he didn't have any money to pay her, though, for the art classes, and she said, "Well, we'll work it out." So some Disney animators and designers ended up teaching over there, like Elmer Plummer and Mark Davis and Ken O'Connor, and I think T. He taught over there as well. And a lot of them made the transition to CalArts when it really got going in the mid 60s, and was located, I think it was I think it might have been in the old Chouinard building, but then it went to Burbank for a couple years and then moved up to the Valencia campus in 71, I think, right during the earthquake. They had a big earthquake up there, and they had to stop building and do repairs and then get back to building. But I just always drew. I drew at home. I drew at school and kindergarten, and I would get entered. I would do something, and one of my teachers would say, "Oh, that looks good," and so we'd have the school-wide art show, and I was always like, I'd get a ribbon for something I did, which were fun. I think a few of them might have gone out to the Kern County Fair and been exhibited, if I remember correctly. I might not be remembering that right. And I was just drawing these. I would draw some subject matter that I kind of tangentially knew about. Like I did a drawing of New York City when I was probably in second grade, but most of it was cartoon stuff.
Now, of course, you mentioned Disneyland a second ago. I have to ask,
Yes.
what did you do at Disneyland? What was your positions?
Well, I worked in foods.
Oh, the fun jobs, right?
Yeah, the uncool kids get put into the foods department. So the first go round was the summer of '76, which was the bicentennial summer, and I worked at the In Between, which is the cafeteria for hosts and hostesses. They were hosts and hostesses in that day. They were not cast members. Because it's all about guests coming to Disneyland. I don't care about the onstage or backstage stuff. That wasn't as important as serving the guests who would come and showing hospitality. That came from Walt Disney. And somebody challenged me on that the other night, and I was like, no, you know what? I think it was better the old way. Even though cast member is non-gender, you know. It can be anybody, whereas host and hostess is gender specific. Right. So I did that for a summer. The In Between. Later, I would learn that that's an actual animation term for an in between drawing, of course. But it's the INN between because it was behind the Plaza Inn.
But speaking of theme parks, there's something that I want to get into, which is 87, which is not Disney related, but it is Knott's Berry Farm related, and people will remember this, which is Kingdom of the Dinosaurs, yes. Which you got involved with. And I'm curious, how did you get involved with this theme park classic, which is created by the legendary Bob Gurr, for one, and is very, very much, for those who don't know, almost an exact predecessor to Dinosaur at Animal Kingdom. I mean, it is very close to the same style. It's a time machine. You go through a thing and you're in dinosaur time. So how did you get involved with this very fun, unique classic?
I did no story on this. So I was only involved in building a large foam core model of what they wanted to do with Dinosaur. But I had to start with what was there, and I had to go into the old Knott's Berry Tales attraction, which was designed by our hero, Rolly Crump. So I would traipse through this dirty, dark, just had the work lights on because it wasn't running anymore, and I had to measure things like I had drawings, but I had to measure things that weren't on the drawings, like the heights and angles of the platforms, of the player platforms where the figures were out in the scenes and stuff. And so that stuff was going to get all ripped out. And so then I had to know what was there, and then I had to put in what was on the drawing. So and I did probably a month I worked on that, but it was a great big model. It was probably 1 inch. I think it was a 1 inch model of the building. And I was working in the old jam factory, and I would take the industrial elevator, one of those ones where you pull the cage across, and you go up. And if I thought about ghosts or anything, I didn't think about it then, thank goodness, because I was the only guy in the building, because all that stuff had moved off the farm that was where they used to manufacture the jams and jellies and put them in glass jars and sell them not only just at the farm, but they were making a big, push out into supermarkets and things.
So this is not the only model work you do. You end up working at WDI, working on I believe the theme park model and some various attractions for Euro Disneyland, or was it just the overall model?
For Euro Disneyland, I think I did some things on the big model, which is the one you'd walk around on, but I worked on the Alice in Wonderland hedge maze, which just got a rehab, thank goodness, finally. It was looking terrible. And then I worked on Discoveryland, right? I worked on the Astro Orbiter, which is ironic because we got it at Disneyland in a terrible place. And worked on the Time After Time attraction. And it's funny because when I went to feature animation, we did the beginning. I worked with Chris Bailey on that, and we worked on the little pre-show film, the actual Nine-Eye film, which is the Circle Vision film. That was done by another group, but we worked on the little pre-show film that would be there in the lobby as you're waiting to go in, So, and then there was a little song that I got to that Chris let me direct using clip images, things from Magic Highway USA and the Nautilus and things like that. So that was a lot of fun, but it was kind of going full circle, working at Imagineering and then going to feature animation, and this thing shows up and it's like, oh, we need this little film. So it's like, oh, great.
Well, and what's so funny about you mentioning this little film, Time After Time, in the audience, this is a little behind the scenes, but they'll love it because this episode probably have already came out. Just an hour ago, I was on the phone doing an interview with Jeff Blythe, who's the director of Time After Time. So it's a fortuitous evening, great, to say the least.
I didn't know Jeff, but he must have been working for Theme Park Productions, working for Tom Fitzgerald.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about that pre-show film. What was the hope? Because of course, it's run me through it. It's not an. Is it the footage itself is of the animatronic, or what elements are animated in it? I know there's specifics.
It seems to me it was what we were working on. Was a video board.
Oh, okay.
With right, and it was like enough monitors to make kind of a CinemaScope rectangle, to make a format. But then it's broken up into 20 screens, I think. And we had to work out. I worked out business with the Robin Williams character, who was not played by Robin Williams there because he was played by a Frenchman. I can't remember. Timekeeper, was that his name? Timekeeper. Okay, so Timekeeper and Nine-Eye, and we did boards. We boarded the whole thing out, and it involved a lot of it was Timekeeper and Nine-Eye taking him different places and going, taking wrong turns and that sort of thing. And this is all prior to what you're going to get in the Circle Vision Theater.
That's so fun.
So, and then there was a little, and most of it, if it wasn't the shooting, and they shot the figures as they I think they were done to be shot for the little pre-show movie. And then we had the rest of the stuff was clips. It was clips from Disney Animation and from, I think we might have used the airplane stuff from the Wright brothers from Victory Through Air Power, that stuff, and like I say, Magic Highway USA, and it's just kind of a smorgasbord.
So how did you end up in working with WDI? Was the model stuff for Euro Disney the first way in, or what was that experience like for you? Because your career is sort of you doing feature animation and then sort of popping in and out of WDI now and then and working on a couple things. So I'm curious about your origins with the Imagineering side of things.
I was working on a show. I was working on John Kricfalucci's Beanie and Cecil over at Deke, and maybe the writing was on the wall. I don't know, but there was an opportunity over at WED, and so I applied and got a couple of interviews, and then finally got hired on a Friday. I'll never forget it. It was a Friday morning. I feigned, a doctor's appointment or something, went over to WED and got hired. And they told me I was going to be starting in the model shop because that was where the big need was. So I don't think drawing was anything that they were interested in at that point. It was just getting all these big design models because and frankly they don't do them anymore. But so that was like, oh great. So I'm hired, and it was before lunchtime, and I go back over to Deke to give him my I was going to give him my 1 week, and nobody was there. Everybody was gone. And there were like tumbleweeds blowing through the hallways and rumble. It looked like, the zombie apocalypse that hit. So somebody found me, or I found somebody, and they said, oh, we all got fired. We all got fired. And the reason they got fired was because the ABC was the client, and this new Beanie and Cecil show was being done for ABC, and they were sending phony storyboards to ABC. This is what we're going to make. This is it. And secretly holding back the really kind of puerile, sophomoric stuff that John is kind of famous for. And they got through about one or two of those when finally the brass at ABC said, that's enough. You guys are lying to us. So everybody got fired on the show.
But you just lucked out.
I absolutely lucked out. Well, first of all, I got to go over to WED, and the second was I got out of Deke.
That is a bit of an upgrade.
Yeah, and then there was a party at I think Sodi is the wife. Yeah, or is it Ruth? I forget which. But Bob Clampett's wife was going to have a party anyway that weekend for the crew, and now it was going to be a more of a wake than a party. Everybody was crying into their beer, so I went to that, and it was weird.
I'm curious about WDI in the 90s. At this point, a lot of the older Imagineers have retired. But
yes.
But when coming in, did you get a chance to interact with some of the legends, even if they were passing through?
Oh my gosh! Well, I got to meet. I had my best buddy in the world was working over there at the time. We had met at Gary Goddard Productions way back when, and this is the fellow I was hoping would come on with me. But anyway, he took me around, and I think Herbie was the guy we got to meet with and just visit. We just dropped into his office one day, and he just was working on something, and he couldn't have been he was the nicest guy ever. He was such a gentleman, and he knew that the interest from these young men, where it was just, we were kind of just what do? You lamp onto the feet of the master, and you. So he answered every question. He showed us what he was working on, and I think he ended up doing some Indiana Jones art for that group, and it was really, really fun. And then later I got to know Mark and Alice fairly well. Not as much as Chris Merritt, who's kind of the keeper of the flame for Mark.
I've interviewed for this show.
The wonderful, yeah.
Yep.
So Chris was there at that time as well. I think he was just kind of coming into his own at Imagineering, and then eventually I ended up working for Tony Baxter on a couple of things, and most significantly Pirates. And then, in addition to Pirates, we took a pass at what Country Bear could be like if Country Bear was going to not be a sit down show anymore.
Yeah, we're gonna get into all of these. I promise you that.
All right. So during that period, I think Herbie and I think John Hinch, he was open enough to visit. He wasn't, he would never high hatch.
Right.
So, but that was about it. I think Mark was over at Gary Goddard when I was over there as well, but I never got to meet him. But he was working on some robot ideas for another kind of a bear show type of thing, where it was all a robot thing. This was for Baltimore, for the power plant in Baltimore.
So, of course, you end up leaving WDI to work in.
No, they fired.
Oh, they fired you.
No, I only had like 5-6 months, and they downsized.
So were you part of that? Well, let's see. That would have been after the large Epcot bounce.
Oh, that was way back in the 80s.
So
80.
I guess they cut, right?
That just happened. That just happened again. Apparently, that they had once this Star Wars thing opened up, that they had a big Christmas party. And dinner and dessert was a pink slip.
Yeah, that is a long legacy of Imagineering, is the Christmas wake, as it were. This happens quite a bit. But so how do you? So you're working, but you end up. So everyone sort of knows. I mentioned this probably in the beginning. Is like you end up in working in story in Disney feature. So
features. I went back to Hanna Barbera for '89. For part of '89, and then a buddy of mine from Cal Arts was doing some development work for Charlie Fink, who was in charge of development at Features, and so he recommended me, and I got a tryout, and I worked on I did some development work for a feature that never saw the light of day, and then and based on that, I think the thing finished, and I went home. No, I wasn't even coming in. I was freelancing at home and bringing stuff in, and it wasn't. And then that thing kind of finished, and it wasn't a couple weeks before I got a call, or I don't think we were doing emails. I got a call from Features, and they had a need on Aladdin. And mostly it was visual development and gags, and I was more adept at the gag thing. I had a roommate. They put me in with a fellow by the name of Peter Gullerud, who did some really interesting visual development for Aladdin. You can still see it at the studio. There's this one where the genie is. Nothing was really designed yet, and so Peter did a scene of the genie's tummy is like a television screen, and Jafar is like watching what Aladdin and Jasmine are doing, and it's all in Peter's style. He had a really fun, loose style, and it was just that's the way you would develop these shows. You wouldn't really have production design on it yet. You would just have the artist like take a swipe at what the scene might look like, or to get the mood across of the emotion or whatever it's trying to convey. But after I got brought in on Aladdin, which was like the tail end of '89, I think, or it might have been early '90. So I began doing these development things or doing visual things. And the first thing I worked on was this parade, this Prince Ali parade, and I came up with the idea of doing it like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, with where you can see their breath and everything's a big. I drew big Macy's like
the balloons, yeah.
But of things of the ancient world, like camels and things that were of their world, and they ended up using a little tiny bit of it. It didn't shape the whole thing, but it impressed Ron and John enough. And I think I had done some continuity, and I think that impressed them enough that they said, "Oh, you know what? I think this kid would be better in story, doing actual story." So I moved into story and worked with fellow by the name of Ed Gombert, who really was setting the house style at the time. Ed was amazing. He was kind of the Bill Pete of his day, and he drove a lot of these early features, the ones when he worked on them. So it was fun to kind of learn with him. You know, he kind of mentored me a little bit, but he had his own stuff to do as well. So you couldn't bother these guys too much. But that was fun, and that's the thing I'm talking about is you join a team, and you have the camaraderie of the team. And we also had to go through a thing where you have your train wreck, and that's where the movie isn't working, and they're not happy at the top. And I heard there was a horrible day where Peter came over, and Peter Schneider. And you could hear through the bathroom walls, because it was next to the conference room. It was very, very posh where we were, and Peter was just reaming Ron and John because they didn't want to take the notes. They didn't want to get rid of a song called "Proud of Your Boy." They didn't want to get rid of the mother character. I still am not used to the Aladdin where he's the street rat in the streets and he has his mother to kind of take care of, and that's something he's worrying about as well. So, but we had to do it. We had to do what they said. Really, you got to take the notes. You just have.
Well, let me ask you about those notes too, because you're dealing with at this time now the way production is and the length of it. I'm going to try to. I'm curious where this all lands. Is Beauty and the Beast clearly is not out yet, but is also in production at the same time, correct? As Aladdin.
That's gonna open before
Correct.
us, right?
Yes, but
that opened before us. Yeah, I remember that in production, and we got invited to see the story reels and comment on it. We were, there would be a point where the little crew would give way to everybody, and we'd have a big screening, and then and just kind of they'd try and gauge how it's playing. And I was friends with probably my closest friend there was Chris Sanders. And so I'd see what Chris was doing on Beauty and the Beast. He was working on the where the wolves attack Belle. She's on the horse and she's trying to get home, and the wolves attack, and then the Beast comes in and saves her, but is injured. And so that was Chris's sequence, and it was really, really cool. And watching that come together was just really, really. And he was making black line drawings. We worked a really crude, beautiful way, which was we'd work with either black colored pencil, or we'd work in the real brave guys like Chris and Ed. They'd work in, and I eventually started doing it too. They'd work in grease pencil in those black China markers, because you could really get thick and thin with them, and you just went crazy with them. So he did a little. I think he did watercolor over that black grease pencil as well. So they were quite stunning drawings.
Was there a level of, and again, I could be wrong about the timeline here, but Beauty and the Beast comes out. It goes to a film festival, not done yet. It's in still sort of in its finishing stages. Gets rave reviews. Does gangbusters. Begins sort of the renaissance of Disney animation.
That was Little Mermaid.
Well, that's true. I should correct myself with that. This is the one that sort of gets the awards, hype, I should say, more than Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid for sure begins that renaissance, whereas Beauty and the Beast is getting that hype.
Well, we were on the precipice of, there was still talk about feature animation being closed down, and so I think features was saved when Ariel began to, when she sang part of that world, or part of your, right? And that really was it. That was really the start of it. And the Disney features became date films, like what Lucas was doing. They became the event films, like Lucas was in the early 80s. with between Indy and the Star Wars movies. So, but then the thing that was very unique about Beauty and the Beast was that they did and I think they captured it on. I have a laser disc of this thing. It's the work in progress version where we actually showed a story reel, a work reel in the works. Where there's still some still drawings in it. And it's got scratch dialogue, but the songs are in it, I think. I think the songs had been done. And it was shown at a very prestigious book fair in Germany. And this was Roy's idea. He said, let's show it. And it just caused all kinds of commotion. And Beauty and the Beast opens, and it's a huge hit, and it wins a Golden Globe, I think, for Best Picture. I think that was our.
And it was nominated for the Oscar.
And was nominated for the Oscar, which a lot of Hollywood was upset with. It's like, well, it's not a real movie; it's a cartoon, right? We got a lot of that. We got that We also got that from the Screen Actors Guild. I'm not going to name any names, but the president at the time, you can Google who it was none too happy about the picture being nominated, but it's true. It was like, wow, we've really, the what is it? Waking Sleeping Beauty really documents this beautifully.
Yeah. And that was my kind of interest when it comes to Aladdin and then other films, of course, that you've worked on, which is Hunchback and Hercules and much later, of course, Treasure Planet. Was there a pressure post Beauty and the Beast to meet a certain watermark that had been set very high, or did you guys still feel in animation that you could be creative but not follow a formula? That's such a tricky thing to do, because you want to be successful, but you need to be creative to be successful, and you can't just do cookie cutter.
Yeah, I think those guys who are guiding these things, the directors and the writers, I think they had the power of their convictions. I think that they were given free rein pretty much to develop these stories and develop these movie ideas. There was enough hands off from management, and yet they're involved. Right. That we look to be involved with the development teams, and they're writers and the creative execs, and then Tom Schumacher and then Peter Schneider being the. And of course, Jeffrey was the kind of the Jeffrey and Michael would see the things. So I think it's there. I'll be honest. There was the pressure to top the box office. It was like we had to, Aladdin was. I think Aladdin did beat Beauty and the Beast ultimately, and then and then Lion King was out of sight. And a friend of mine observed at the time, said, gee, 18 months is a good release pattern, because you'll get a summer movie, and then 18 months later you'll get a holiday movie, you'll get a Christmas movie. And that like Hunchback was a Christmas movie, and it made total sense. It made more sense for it to open for the holidays than being in the summer, at least in my opinion.
Oh, sure. But
there was this kind of competition of beating out the last guy, and but we never topped Lion King again. So.
Well, part of that process too is pitching, and you mentioned Jeffery Katzenberg, and of
yes.
course, Waking Sleeping Beauty talks a lot about pitching to Jeffery Katzenberg. And I'm curious about your own experiences being part of a team pitching. I'm assuming you had to pitch to Jeffrey and you had to pitch to Michael and do those things. I
don't think I pitched to Michael, but I did do a Saturday morning pitch to Jeffrey at 8 a.m. or something.
What was that? I feel like everyone has a Jeffery Katzenberg pitching story. Was he as engaged as they say he is in those processes?
Yes. Yeah, he was really good. He was good audience, and I liked how he gave notes, and he wouldn't solve the problem, but he'd point out where it was. And he wouldn't try and volunteer his solution. He would let us work out the solution, which is really the way you want to do it, I think.
So out of the three films here in this sort of section of your career, Aladdin, Hunchback, and Hercules, I'm curious, which one do you find that was your favorite to sort of storyboard?
Hercules.
What was it about Hercules?
Well, I'll tell you, the very first day that we were officially starting, they took us up to the screening room on the third floor of the animation building, which is Walt's old screening room, and we sat down and they ran Superman for us. And I sat, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, you know. And I'm sitting there and I'm like watching Superman, and I was like, I'm being paid to watch Superman. And there was and we borrowed a lot of it. I knew what they wanted in terms of they wanted to do kind of a screwball comedy. But I borrowed liberally. I had a sequence where he saves Pain and Panic, who are in the guise of little boys. That's what are they? They're trapped in the pit, right? And Meg tells them. So I always played Hercules just really just as sincere as you could, you know. And I borrowed from the Fleischer Superman cartoons in terms of trying to get those just the perfect shots for how he would take care of this giant boulder and lift it up, and it was just great. It was just lots and lots of fun. And then the thing about Meg, I didn't do a lot of Meg, but she was coming together beautifully, especially when we found the voice. But she was very, very influenced by Barbara Stanwyck mostly, but Jean Arthur and all these screwball comedies from the 30s. That was the and we saw Ball of Fire, which was a lot of fun. And we saw what's the one, the Miami Story, Another Sturgis, the Preston Sturgis picture. So I got introduced to a lot of those movies on Hercules, and it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we got killed at the box office by Men in Black. Yeah. And but I think the movie is pretty underrated, and every time I watch it, I'm really pleased with it. I was like, oh, I'm right. You know, I forget that it was a job, and I enjoy it like a movie. I would have enjoyed it either way.
Let me ask you about something else you work on around this time, which is Runaway Brain, which for those some should remember this. It was a Mickey Mouse short about basically Mickey takes a job to make a little extra cash to take Minnie on a date, and he gets his brain switched with basically a big Frankenstein Pete. But the thing about Runaway Brain, which I think is kind of fascinating, is at the time it was probably the edgiest persona Mickey had since like the early shorts, and in many ways it's kind of reminiscent of what they're currently doing with him now. He's a little more sassy, a little more like selfish even. Was there an intention in the storyboarding to bring a bit of an edge to Mickey Mouse that hadn't been there in a long time?
Well, it was certainly the director's intention to do it. Mickey was kind of a jerk in Runaway Brain, I think. The beginning was. He doesn't ignore Minnie, and
he forgets their anniversary and plays a video game. Yeah.
That was Chris Bailey's project, and I was on a little crew of 3, I think. And we had done a whole Mickey cartoon prior to this one called what was it? Tourist Trapped, I think. And it was essentially, it wasn't right, but it was. We took the idea from the old Mickey Mouse club opening, where Donald apparently is jealous of all the attention Mickey's getting. You know, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck. Right. So that was kind of the place where they jumped off in terms of the story, and it essentially is, and it really became Bugs and Daffy, and Daffy, where Daffy / Donald is actually trying to get Mickey killed in these traps and things, and and it wasn't right at all. It's like that Donald wouldn't do this, and it was just too edgy. It was too edgy. So I think Runaway Brain kind of is actually a rollback a little bit from the first thing we did, Tourist Trapped. So. But yeah, but Chris didn't like Mickey being just for little kids. He wanted to be able to enjoy him too, and that's the thing. If you're in sync with the producers and the the people who hand out the job, who want to make this little short, but it's up to us and the director to find it and to create it. If you feel like you have their blessing, you can kind of do what you want, and you do it to please yourself. That's so many people do this work to please themselves. If they're not happy with it, and it's not ego, I don't think, or anything like that. It's just a matter of it's got to be good. It's got to be worthy. And that's the problem about working at Disney is it's a haunted place in that everything, not so much now, but everything we were doing and the group before us, like the first new group everything is measured against what Walt and his 9 old men were doing. So it's like baseball, It's always Ruth was so much better. It's always that.
Yeah.
So
well, you end up back over in Imagineering, as you mentioned earlier, working with Tony Baxter on some additions to Pirates of the Caribbean for its 30th.
I was still featured.
Oh, so you were just kind of helping out.
I brought in. I was moonlighting, but they were fine with it, and because it was a Disney inside the company. So yeah, Pirates had a 30th anniversary coming up, and there were the idea was, and this is before I was brought on, that the chase scene was going to be augmented, changed a little bit. Not entirely. It still mechanically was the same scene. And I inherited unbelievably poor drawings of gags. Somebody had taken a pass at what I'm gonna hand myself. The trick was, or the conceit was that we were going to use figures from the World of Motion show at Epcot, which had just closed. Now that's fine because they were cast from the original Pirates anyway, so stylistically they fit. But we had to go through. I wasn't happy with some of the ones they chose, and then what the guy did with them in terms of the gags. They just didn't read. They were not, Mark Davis, what Mark Davis does. And so I have I kind of really, really push myself to do a somewhat adequate impression of Mark, not only in just drawing technique, because I totally just aped what he was doing, and they were happy with it. And so I kind of became known as the guy who could do Mark Davis somewhat. So I did a couple other things.
You did Jungle Cruise as well. I mean, there was some stuff that you sort of pitched for that as well, correct?
I never got around to pitching those. Yeah, I was trying. I wanted to, but I was back at features, and I didn't really have a path in to pitch. So I think there was a colonel, like an English colonel kind of guy,
expert,
who gets his butterfly net over the head of a big ape. I can totally see it working.
Yeah. Did you feel that pressure, that legacy that Davis had left on these characters while creating these gags, or did you sort of like?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure they were right, and I think we got the humor of the thing in, even though we got torn apart for making a politically correct Pirates, which was not what we were doing at all. We were trying to augment it with gags that were kind of in the spirit of the original. We had the keg, the rum kegs, shot full of holes and spouting rum, which was in the original model, the model in '66, and it was and there was a dog lapping up the rum that was spilling down on the steps, and it was going to be on the opposite side of the auction scene, where all the pirates are watching the proceedings. And we also put a couple of figures. They were head and shoulder figures from World of Motion. I think the guy in the manhole, and there was another one, and they were both cast from the original Piccolo player at the well. It was the same face, but all we had was a head and shoulders, and there was dialogue on that fort, across from the Wicked Wench from the pirate ship. So it was like, well, that was a natural. And plus, Sam McKim, if you go back and look at his drawing of pirates, that wonderful map that he did, there are Spanish soldiers up on the fort, and they're like resisting the barrage of the cannonballs and everything from thing. And there was like I say, wonderful performance coming from the fort from invisible characters all those years, and it was the great Paul Frees doing the sound, doing the character voices. So it was like, well, we got to add those guys. And I think Bob and I came up with that. We said, oh, we got to do that. And so he got to do the shadow fight. I think he pitched the shadow fight on the other side, and then we had, and I was in charge of the conquistadores, on the board. And so that and a couple other characters, I'm so happy that we got to do that. That was really, really fun. And now they've changed. Of course, they've changed it again. But now they've taken out all the Paul Frees dialogue, because they took out Blackbeard, and they took out the guys on the fort, because it all has to be
Barbossa.
It all has to be Jack Sparrow. It all has to be Barbossa and Jack Sparrow centric on the story. So there was talk about, and I think it got pitched by my partner about a B track at Pirates, and it got pitched to Marty, and it was all about splitting off from the story we know and going another way and taking another channel, and it was going to go through the boat storage that's in the fort, but then we were going to blow out the wall and add 3 or 4 new town scenes with new characters. And I always wanted to do that because that part isn't sacred. Isn't
right.
like the way the original Pirates is. You can put all the Jack Sparrows you want in there, because it's and then the chase scene was going to be seen from both sides, from the A track. We call that the B track idea, and gosh, that was fun working on that stuff too. Of course, they never went for it, but I still think a good idea is a good idea, and so Pirates. Making these things more dense is something I think they should think about in terms of Pirates, making it a more dense complex. Certainly Haunted Mansion, mostly because I think Haunted Mansion is probably bigger on the internet now. I think it has a bigger fan base now than
for sure.
It's amazingly huge, and so. Adding what you could to, it's a show building, and you could probably expand out and add things. And I always wanted to add a kind of an upstairs after the ballroom. The idea, the conceit is you're upstairs anyway because you're looking down on the ballroom, and so I thought it'd be fun to kind of go off into the bedrooms and the study and the trophy room and things like that. Full of ghosts and fill it with a new kind of ghost. It's like, well, we have the Peppers ghosts in the ballroom, something else before you get to the Butyrate ghosts down in the
graveyard.
Grave.
Oh, that sounds fun. Let's speak of it. Let's talk another very fun idea that never got sadly anywhere, and that's Critter Country 500, which is basically literally wacky races with the Country Bear Jamboree characters.
I couldn't help myself.
I am a massive Country Bear guy. Like, that's my thing. Like, I will rope drop Country Bear. Like, I love Country Bear, and we're holding it dearly here in Disney World as much as we can. How did this idea come about? And like, you also worked on story for it, and I'm just, anything you can tell us, I will listen, because I would love to see Henry and the boys do more things in the park, and this is just fascinating to me.
Oh yeah, I've always felt the bears are timeless. I think they're just as great as the other classic Disney characters. I think they're wonderful. I didn't get a lot of direction. We didn't really have a story yet, other than it's just a crazy race through the backwoods, and everybody gets a car, or the car. Speaking of wacky races. The actual ride vehicle was a lot like the old Chug-a-Bug, if you remember the old Arkansas Chug-a-Bug. Okay, the hillbilly car in Wacky Races, number 8, and it was driven by Lazy Luke and Blubber Bear, and Luke was asleep and he drove with his feet. Same voice actor did both of them. The bear was always terrified. He's like, so that was designed. I didn't have anything to do with that, but my assignment was to take the characters and create vehicles for them that lend to their personality and their, and to me that was like, well, that's also not only just personality, but what kind of power it is. Like, with some are steam cars and one's a wind,
His
a wind-powered car.
Who does the wind?
Liver lift, yeah, of course, because he's blowing. So the only other one could be who's the big one with the jug? Or will it? Yeah, that character would have been great too, because he's blowing on the horn jug. So actually, I think it is that guy. It's not Liver Lips. It's the one from the five Bear Rugs.
That's true. Okay, yeah, I think you're correct. I have to rethink that one through, but you're right.
Blowing on the corn jug. You should hear the bear blow. That character. I wish I could think of his name. By the way, the Bear Rugs, that was Hanna Barbera. By the way, just so the Hillbilly Bears back in '65 on the Adam Ant Show.
Yeah, was the plan for that? I mean, it was supposed to take up this is where I'm confused. Was it? It
was going to use the existing show building.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And I believe Splash had happened. But there was a thing way before Splash called Moonshine Express. And I think this was the beginning of it. And it was a kind of a soapbox racer kind of thing, a hillbilly racer thing. And it was going to go through the Hatfields and the McCoys. And so, which loosely based on what's that from? Make Mine Music, I think, right? One of the package features, and there's this Hatfields and the McCoys segment, and so this kind of owed its life to that, and it was going to literally go behind the mansion. You'd load in Bear Country, and you'd go behind the mansion, and then I think it would take you to New Orleans Square, and you would offload there.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Yeah, I have a plan for it somewhere, and it kind of shows that, and I think it was conceived of before Splash.
Okay.
So, and then Splash got going when America Sings was finally going to close, and that was Tony's driving on the freeway one day, and it appeared to him like out of the clouds. And the idea to use all those animatronic characters. And
then, of course, now this is where Winnie the Pooh is over at Disneyland. So, yeah.
It's a huge violation, I think. Winnie the Pooh is a Fantasyland character. He's also in an English forest. He's not an American forest. And Critter Country / Bear Country, that was the Great Northwest. They talked about it. They talked about it being Minnesota, that was the Northwest. Of course, when you live in California, the Northwest is Washington and Oregon. So I always thought it was that part of that Northwest, but then I came to learn that they were doing like where, Paul Bunyan country.
Let me ask you about another unique piece of your filmography, which is you did some additional storyboards for Toy Story 2. And what I think is interesting about this is like, I'm curious about the creative process and the differences, or if there are no differences, I'm sure there are differences, between Disney animation features and Pixar. What environment did you sort of find yourself in when you were at Pixar? And this is, of course, their third film. Heavily, for people who don't know, Toy Story went through a bunch of development back and forth. Did you find the Pixar process different in any way from Disney feature?
Not really, because you remember Pixar is really Disney culture.
Mm-hmm.
John Lasseter came out of Disney features, and everybody mostly came out of Cal Arts, and we were all pretty imbibed. Right. Would that be the right word? We had been immersed in Disney culture, and we were geek boys from when we were young. So it just kind of led itself that way, at least for me. Now there were management. There were some management people there who were not Disney studio veterans. I don't think they have a lot of I don't think Ralph Guggenheim came out of Disney, and he was a producer on the thing. But what we were doing at the time was that Pixar would get notes from Disney execs from day one. Right, that's about, because you said it. About the train wreck that where they had to go back onto it, and they did it in 6 weeks. They had to do a completely new story. But a friend of mine calls that jacking up the movie, dropping the old story out and putting the new story back in, and then back up into it like an engine, and then you take the thing off the jacks, and hopefully you got something. So we were helping out at features. They picked 4 of us to help with the development of the feature of Toy Story 2, which was going to be a direct to video feature. So it didn't have Bug's Life was being worked on at the same time. So Toy Story 2 was, I don't think it had quite the prestige of working on the first Toy Story or working on a Pixar theatrical feature. At least that kind of was the. But then it got announced that it was going to become a feature, and so ramping up the story became of the utmost, and so feature animation was asked to help out, mostly because I think a lot of the crew was split on the 2 movies, especially story. Like Joe Ranft was over at Bug's Life, working directly with John, of course. And so we would work on the thing. We talked kind of like what we're doing here. I think we would do these primitive video conference calls. And then we would pitch on a downshooter. We'd take our drawings and we'd put it on a downshooter and go through them one at a time. They could only see one drawing at a time, which is kind of not the way boards were being done. Storyboards are 4x8, and and they got 40 plus drawings on them, so you could read the whole thing and that's the thing when you would see, and this is something we had to get used to, is not being able to see the whole board, but to see, you'd have to remember what you saw because you only saw one drawing at a time. Mm-hmm. And so you remember that moment where he did that? Oh, I forget where it was. You couldn't go back to the board and look. There it is. So we were doing that for maybe 4 weeks or so, and everybody was dissatisfied. Everybody was like, oh, it's not really fun to pitch to them this way. And so we went up for a day, the crew, the 4 story guys, and we kind of got the lay of the land and how it all worked, and really what this was to see introducing us into this environment, and then they would send a couple of us up like a week later after they chose who it was, and it was me and then Floyd Norman. And and so they would fly us up on a Sunday night, and we'd start the week. They set up an apartment for us and arranged for us to. I think I might have driven up, so I would have a vehicle, but I don't know if Floyd had his car. But we were there. We were in the story room on Toy Story 2, and I was with the nuts who were there, and it was a bunch of nuts, and they're all funny guys, and we were working on things that eventually we did. There would be things that would change. Jessie the Cowgirl was the first thing that evolved from John's input, mostly because he didn't like the character who preceded her, which was a character called Senorita Cactus. And she was this little cactus character, and she had her fan and her, it's just like, that's not a toy anybody would want to play with. You're afraid of getting stuck. So this new character, Jessie the Cowgirl, kind of evolved, and I think scratch-wise, I think they were thinking about casting. It was going to be Holly Hunter, and eventually it ended up being Joan Cusack, who did the voice. And the thing that really got her going was John said, "I'm not getting the emotional," and we didn't work on this part of it. At least I didn't, and I'm sorry I didn't. But the backstory told in the song, and Randy knew about the song. It was just like, it was so good. It was so good. I was so impressed with how that changed, even though it wasn't what we were kind of doing what we were asked to do, but they still didn't know. And then John took a swipe at it with Randy, and they created this whole backstory, and it was wonderful, as anybody who's seen the picture knows.
Yeah. So more recently, you have worked on shows like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and Jake and the Neverland Pirates and Roadster Racers and The Lion Guard and Fancy Nancy. What I'm curious about all of these, of course, being they're television, but they're also a lot of them television sort of centered around Disney Junior, more preschool age kids, that sort of stuff. And what I'm interested in is there a difference in mapping out a story and even framing it when you're dealing with an audience that is still developing their ability to consume a visual medium?
Well, the point of the shows, the impetus for the shows was to do curriculum. Back in when the first one was Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and so there was counting, and there was color identification, there were words and concepts that were introduced, and that was curriculum, and a lot of that was instilled by they had a consultants. They'd have educational consultants who would look at the things, and then they would put the story reel together, and then they'd show it to a test audience that was the age that they wanted, so, and then they would get their notes back, and that would sometimes change it, sometimes it wouldn't. The shows were completely script driven, so you had to go with what the writers came up with. I mean, and there's no time to mess with it. That's the thing about television. You have to just hit the ground running and go as fast as you can, and it's very hard. But the thing that I would always look for, and it's the thing I would do from features, was you'd look for an opportunity for a gag. You'd look to, well, it was what Walt called plussing it, and that was I was probably known for that more than anyone on those crews. I wouldn't like some things, and they wouldn't work visually. They wouldn't have cartoon physics in it like it should. So I would really go for cartoon. I'd go back and classic short cartoons were not really the language of the day anymore, especially for preschool. But everybody knows the stuff when they see it, and I more often than not, I'd get away with it. I'd get an attaboy, like, oh, that's better, love that gag. Like I had Jake and Captain Hook and Smee, and the story was that they'd been turned into ghosts, So because there were 3 of them, I knew, you know what, I have to do the hitchhiking ghost somewhere. It's nowhere in the script, but I have to have it. So I working out the story beats. I was like, oh, we can do it here. They get picked up. A big chase is happening, and so you cut ahead, and there are those 3 idiots, and they're thumbing for a ride, and they get picked up. They get, it's, of course, I'm actually borrowing from Huckleberry Hound. So I'm like kind of mashing a couple things together. So that was a lot of fun. That was like 3rd season of Jake or something. It was like my first show back, and I did it, and I got a lot of good compliments. That's why I do it, to get my ego stroked.
So as we finish up here, I'm curious, what creative endeavors do you find yourself in currently?
I am involved in something I can't really talk about, but it's with a certain hopefully some stuff developing for a streaming service. I'm not going to say what. Itch. And then just for fun, I work on my own things at home just in case. I'm doing some park design right now for I'm really bugged with what Star Wars did to Disneyland. So I'm trying to work around it and still put in a couple things that I always wanted to do, and then I lose my sight.
Yeah.
I lose my sight because they built Star Wars on it. I was like, oh. And then they built another parking structure on it. So that was really what I was. So watching these sites get gobbled up, it was like, you know what? I better do this thing while, because now they're gonna expand the Disneyland Hotel, but I think they're building a tower to complement the other 3 towers. You've been out here, right? Mm-hmm. You've been to the Disneyland Hotel. So I think it's going to be in the back, kind of where the restaurants, where Granville's is, and that sort of thing. And that would make the most sense to me. So then you would get a box, 4-sided box with hotel towers. I'm thinking there was a something with the city of Anaheim that they would get money back or tax breaks or something if they built a new luxury hotel. So they were going to build one in front of the Disneyland Hotel, and essentially it was the sustainability hotel that Joe Rohde is working on right now, or was working on. I don't know if anything happened to it. I think that was going to go in Paris. But the theme of it, the conceit was it was going to be a sustainability experience. It's like, but I remember seeing the plans for this new luxury hotel, and it was exactly that hotel that they were already developing. But that didn't happen, and I'm actually glad it didn't. But they closed up the ESPN zone and the movie theater at the western end of downtown Disney. They lost the Earl of Sandwich. That everybody screamed the most about the Earl of Sandwich going away, and it came back. So anyway, so I'm just keeping myself busy, kind of playing around with this thing and kind of working in the old Disney style in terms of, you got to have A through E attractions. You got to have an A, a B, a C, a couple C's, a D, and a couple of E's in the area that you develop. Notice Star Wars Land does not have that. They have 2 great big E's, and then a couple of things that cost a lot of money to do. Build your robot or build your lightsaber. And I don't think that's nearly as appealing as Fantasyland, which has 14 attractions kind of grouped around the courtyard and Storybook Land and all that. I think that's the way you do it. And the classic stuff that I saw in the 70s that didn't happen but were pitched and were designed by Tony Baxter and other people, Rolly. They used that principle. They developed these areas, and they had like 8 to 10 attractions kind of scattered around this new thing. And it was like, gosh, that's the way to do it, I think. To have a lot going on and a lot of kinetics and and with an idea on the things that are obviously probably the next big things, like Tomorrowland, I think is the next big thing. And then personally for me, I'm just playing around with something that works around how Star Wars. I had to wait till they finished it and I saw what it was, and it's like, okay, now I have a reference point. I have something I can anchor it to.
Well, fingers crossed for those ideas. And
let's hope.
Yeah, right.
Your lips to God's ears. my producer used to say.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Dreamfinders, Kirk. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I enjoyed talking to you, Nathan. I hope to talk to you again.
And that's it for this episode of Dreamfinders. Thanks so much to Kirk Hanson for being my guest. Dreamfinders is edited by Shannen Michaelsen and quality control by Ben Harris. It's hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at @SomeStuffISaid. Our podcast artwork is provided by JP Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. Tell your friends about the show, and please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you or someone else you know would make a great guest on this program, feel free to leave us an email at dreamfinders@WDWNT.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.